thank you for being here, especially on a Friday afternoon. I'm very happy to include the University of Arizona on my tour here. I'm also happy to see several old acquaintances. John Peterson and I go for a while back, and you have a real fantastic asset in Tucson, in him. It's not every day that one sees folks assembled to hear about an Arabian queen, one who hailed from a country that is often in the news for allegedly creating tensions and adding fuel to various fires. What will follow is a somewhat scholarly talk about a leading personality who passed away in 2000, but whose legacy is alive and well. Allow me, before I start, however, to take just a few moments to tell you why I wrote this book and how difficult the process was. Believe me, it was not easy. As you know by now, this is my 11th book and the 5th on Saudi Arabia, and like all of its predecessors, it took the better part of 3 years to research, compose, and publish. When you spend several years on a subject, you can't but develop understanding unless you set out to smash it. Yet setting out to write about a woman who lived in a segregated society was even more challenging than I assumed, and truth be told, I did not embark on a crusade to either laud or denigrate Iffat Al Thunayan. I was just simply curious to discover the person who left her mark on King Faisal, a subject that fascinated me ever since I was a little boy when I saw the king at the open-air terminal building in Beirut, Lebanon, and about whom I composed, as Christian said a few moments ago, a political biography back in 2008. In other words, I discovered Iffat through Faisal, and knew that she must have been a remarkable individual, because everybody at that time was talking about Iffat, so I was curious. Yet as a man, I did not realize when I set out on the project, how challenging it would be. And although the Queen's female offspring were worthy legatees who welcomed my systematic, even intrusive questions, others were not as forthcoming. And since I needed to interview many women who work at the institutions Queen Iffat created, in other words, complete strangers to me, there were a few hurdles to cross. Those of you who know how difficult it is to navigate in that kind of an environment will appreciate the efforts that went into it. Those who do not know will hopefully discover some of the more charming consequences in the book. Suffice it to say that a small team was necessary to identify potential interviewees, make arrangements to secure appointments, persuade them that a male American researchers would be asking personal questions, even if several received me wearing full niqabs, travel to their destinations, exchange traditional greetings in what is still a highly conventional society where women do not mingle with strangers, especially males, and gather original materials about a person adored by most of the folks who knew her. My interviews with several elderly women who knew Iffat Al Thunayan very well and who could tell me many more stories about her, and they did, was something I will never forget and that I tried to share in this book. Of course, I was impressed, though my chief hurdle was to be careful and eschew a hagiography. Because I did not know the Queen and never met her, I could only see her photographs, read a few letters she composed, and heard her voice over a family session mischievously recorded by one of her grandchildren. Over the course of multiple interviews with 53 individuals, itself a formidable challenge, it became rather clear that many were truly envious of the late Queen's abilities to function, even shine in Saudi society. As the book will soon be published in Arabic, many Saudi women and hopefully many Saudi men will discover what it means to be a Saudi queen. That knowledge is a great recompense to me as the conservative society struggled with reforms that, truth be told, are likely to change it permanently in the next generation. So allow me to close this short aparté by sharing with you what I consider to be the 3 approaches to writing books in general, and why I think this book is worth reading. There are books that praise a subject and those that deride it. Then there are the ones that add value by delving on rarely discussed subjects or those that are difficult to access. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, and unless one is studying angels with whom one cannot find fault, 99% of what is available is negative. Even original research is skewed, nowadays sparkled with anti-Wahhabi prose that pretends to offer expertise on takfiris and other extremists. Let's not go there. This, therefore, is my modest contribution to add value and tell the story of a woman who left her mark on Saudi society. So why should you read this book? As some of you know, there are about 1 million books published each year around the world, half in English and half in other languages. And according to Google, there are about 130 million books out there, which is a lot, though most are so specialized that not more than a few thousand individuals will read most of them. If you're an avid reader and go through roughly 100 books per year, you will most likely consume as many as 5,000 books over the course of 50 years, give or take a few. Therefore, one has to be quite selective and read useful volumes that would potentially prove to advance one's core interests as well as help one's intellectual growth. Curiosity, which is one of man's greatest inventions, is bound to ensure some happiness, as the search for knowledge seldom prevented one from accomplishing excellence. At a time when little or nothing written or broadcast about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is positive, and unless you're a specialist on Saudi Arabia, why should you read a book about its most renowned queen? Simply because Iffat Al Thunayan changed contemporary history and stood as a model for Arab and Muslim women. If you're curious about the truly remarkable individuals, who left their marks on the 20th century, you might find her life story inspiring too, which is always a plus. Now, according to Robert Lacey, who some years ago wrote a famous book called The Kingdom, Arabia in the House of Saud, Prince Faisal bin Abdul Aziz made a stop in Istanbul after his 1932 visits to Warsaw and Moscow and brought back with him a new wife, a woman whose impact on Saudi Arabia was to prove, in its way, more revolutionary than anything that a Soviet friendship treaty was likely to have achieved, end quote. The colorful reportage notwithstanding, and while Iffat Al Thunayan was certainly an intelligent, articulate, and forceful young woman, the only Al Saud princess who became popularly known as a queen, no other women princess has been given this label. She's the only one. The viceroy of the Hejaz did not find his future wife in Turkey. There is no truth to the story. Lacey further reported that Iffat and her mother, Asia, asked Faisal during this Istanbul sojourn to help settle a land dispute in Ta'if between her late father, Muhammad Saud, and her uncle, Ahmad, though there is no evidence of such a property nor of a quarrel over it. Muhammad Saud Al Thunayan, the father, may well have inherited some land in Ta'if or elsewhere in Saudi Arabia, for all we know, although he himself never set foot in the kingdom, and presumably was fully immersed in his military duties to stimulate such a clash. Moreover, Ahmad Al Thunayan acted as an advisor to both the founder, Abdul Aziz bin Abdul Rahman, as well as Prince Faisal, though once again, it was not known whether he actually owned any properties alone or together with family members in Ta'if or anywhere else for that matter. In the book, I talk about this background in Istanbul, her birth, the role of the Al Thunayan family in the Al Saud, and how the grandfather was essentially taken by force by the Ottoman Empire from Bombay through Saudi Arabia all the way to Istanbul and made to serve in the Ottoman Empire. I provide all the details. The father of Iffat Al Thunayan, Muhammad Saud, was born in Turkey. He became a physician and served in the Ottoman army and eventually passed away during the war. She, of course, was also born in Istanbul, and she came to Saudi Arabia, as you will see in a second, when she was 16 years old. Still, Lacey's reportage was not limited to land deals or alleged disputes that, at least in the early 1900s, required princely interventions to resolve, in which presumably Prince Ahmad could arrange given his proximity to the founder. He claimed, this is Lacey again, for example, that Faisal had an eye for attractive young ladies, and when prompted by Iffat to look into this land issue, suggested that mother and daughter should come to Jeddah, where he could arrange everything to their advantage. The prince, who apparently led a wild youth and disappointed foreign diplomats in the 1920s and early 1930s, who never thought he would amount to much because he was so tied up by his women, must have disappointed such facile and gratuitous prognostications. The assertion that Iffat changed all that was prescient, save for the wrong reasons. To be sure, Faisal settled down with her to a marriage remarkable in its time for the comparative equality between the partners and also for the strictness with which their children were brought up. Above all else, the future monarch was aware of Iffat's presence in the house as the princess made creative changes without upsetting existing traditions. Naturally, any husband, and more important, any leader, would be impressed by the grace with which his spouse would conduct herself. Yet to assert that Iffat was a political partner that literally tamed Faisal would be a gross exaggeration, for neither was she so aggressive as to impose her will, especially in the 1930s and 1940s, when she was busy raising her children. She had 9 surviving children, 5 boys and 4 girls. Nor was he so lame as to forego local traditions that did not allow for women to voice their views on socio-political changes. Such transformations occurred, of course, though much later than many assumed, probably in the late 1960s or early 1970s, and always if and only if whatever recommendations the Queen made served the intrinsic interests of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and with Faisal's full consent. In more ways than one, Iffat Al Thunayan became a pillar of the Al Saud family. This is one of the themes of the second chapter, that she, above all else, united the family together and knew exactly what she wanted to do with the family, the kind of advice she used to give. I did not put all the details in the book because obviously this is a big book already, 300 pages, but I left out several things. For example, because when she arrived in Turkey, in Saudi Arabia from Turkey, she was not necessarily accepted at the very beginning. So she had to fight to be accepted by the other members of the family. Now, the late Queen was a descendant from a branch of the Al Saud that was forcefully removed to the Ottoman Empire in the 1800s. Her grandfather, Abdullah bin Thunayan, it's very strange that there is someone called Abdullah bin Abdullah. Usually this doesn't happen, but the second Abdullah was born the night when Abdullah died. So therefore they named him after his father. Again, I explain all that in the book. It's very complicated to take time here. But he sought his fortune in India, where upon his arrival in Bombay, today is Mumbai, he was duly arrested and shipped off to Constantinople by the British Raj, in those days known as Constantinople, today Istanbul, who thought he was his father, as they both had the same name, ostensibly because Ottoman authorities wanted him. In Constantinople, the Sultan married Abdullah bin Abdullah to a local lady and later appointed him a member of the Majlis al-Ayan, a notable. This relationship produced 5 sons and a daughter, including Muhammad Saud, Iffat's father, who was inducted in the Ottoman army as a physician and died in the campaign to drive out British, French, and Greek troops from Turkey in 1921. In addition to Iffat, Muhammad Saud fathered a son named Zaki, who was the future queen's only full brother. When the doctor was killed in battle, most probably in what is today northern Iraq, fighting Kurdish rebels, his widow married Ibrahim Adham, with whom she had Mawara Muzaffar and Kamal. For those of you who don't know, Kamal served as Faisal's confidant and eventually became the first chief of intelligence of the kingdom. So therefore, Iffat had a half-sister and half-brother, Kamal Adham being his half-brother. Iffat was born in 1916 and lived the first few years of her life in Constantinople. Her uncle Ahmed, this is a key individual in the story, came to Riyadh in 1917. So therefore, a year after this niece was born, and looked after the family for several years until the second marriage. Funds were scarce, but the extended family ensured that the offspring were looked after properly. Interestingly, Ahmed accompanied Prince Faisal bin Abdul Aziz on his first trip to London and Paris in 1919, when the two men got better reacquainted. Eventually, Iffat accompanied her aunt to Saudi Arabia in 1932. So therefore, she arrived in Saudi Arabia in 1932, just a few months before the country was declared independent. When she was 16 and soon afterwards married Faisal. I talk in the book about the betrothals and what happened and why she was not supposed to marry Faisal. She wrote, because of the desperate situation of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I, essentially Iffat's mother and aunt suggested that they write a letter to the founder of the kingdom saying, we're family, our situation is pretty bad, take us back. And the letter response came back and saying, okay, come back. With the idea that this young lady will be a future wife of the founder, King Abdul Aziz. But when Faisal met them in Jeddah at the port, he was essentially besotted. She was a stunningly attractive woman and natural blonde, which stood out obviously in that environment. And within a matter of 2 weeks, Faisal decided that he was going to marry her and wrote a telegram to his father in Riyadh saying, congratulate me, I married one of our cousins and I'm coming home soon, I'll introduce you to her. It was very funny. Now, I'm sorry?
Is there a picture of her in the book?
Unfortunately, I'm glad you asked me that question. Unfortunately, there isn't. Although I have seen the pictures, there are pictures of the family members, the daughters and when they were young. But we could not put a picture because of restrictions.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to save the interesting parts of the first encounter to those of you who plan to read the book. But suffice it to say that Prince Faisal, who became the kingdom's third ruler in the 20th century, met his future wife when she arrived, that is after she arrived in Mecca, to perform her pilgrimage with her paternal aunt, Jawharan bin Abdullah Al Thunayan. And in the book, something I'm not going to talk about here, in the book I talk about the role that she played, the Queen played, in creating the education institutions and the health institutions. And it was because of Jawharan, her aunt, who was handicapped, that so much attention was devoted to taking care of other handicapped Saudis. This is something that is not quite known. Obviously, in a society that is a segregated society where intermarriage among cousins is so frequent, you do have serious health issues to deal with, and you do have a number of handicapped individuals that need attention, that need care. Before she actually shepherded the institutions to provide for these individuals, there was little or nothing. Most of those folks were just shunned away. She changed all of that, and I have an entire chapter devoted to this very important question. And of course, there is another part which I'm not going to talk about now. In terms of her legacy, the universities that she created, I've interviewed about 25 graduates of Iffat University, young ladies in their 20s, early 20s, who obviously did not know the Queen, but who are mesmerized by her and who consider the Queen to be their model in life. This is the perfect woman for them. They would all aspire to be like her. So therefore the legacy lives. It's just quite interesting, actually. At any rate, Iffat and Faisal met and they got married. And of course, since Iffat spoke little or no Arabic, she only spoke Turkish at that point, and Faisal knew only a few words of Turkish, not much. So therefore, you can imagine how they taught each other their respective native languages, and 4 of their children actually were bilingual as they learned Turkish and Arabic simultaneously at home, including the foreign minister who passed away just recently, Saud Faisal, who spoke perfect Turkish. Though she eventually became fluent in Arabic, the future queen retained traces of a Turkish accent, like me, which further distinguished her in the multinational Hijaz region on the western part of the Arabian Peninsula, which was home to Islam's holiest cities and where people from all over the world flocked for centuries. This linguistic particularity was valuable as she imparted her interest in other cultures, not only to her children, but over the years to many Saudis as well. And though she was labeled the Turkiya, the Turkish one, she was labeled the Turkiya, the princess overcame existing prejudices and thrived. The princely couple eventually had 9 children together, and according to those who knew Iffat Al Thunayan, she was extremely well organized. She sewed, with her mother's assistance, the curtains of their new home in Mecca. When I say home, you know, we're talking 1932. It's a mud house. You know, there are no palaces in those days. It's not like the palaces that exist today or later in her life. And when she arrived, I mean, this is a woman that's coming from a sophisticated city like Istanbul to Mecca, which in those days was a backwater. And there was no sanitary facilities inside the house. You had to go to the outhouse, to give you an idea how it must have been a shock for her. But over the years, she adapted and she started sewing the curtains of their new home in Mecca and insisted on family lunches or dinners, depending on time and place. In fact, when she was alive, she had a dinner every night and imposed that all of her children, male and female, attended if they were in town. And this was a tradition that unfortunately did not outlive her. And the rest is history, as they say. And what was interesting, of course, is that she was a listener, an excellent listener. She would have her ears up to find out what's going on in that society. She listened very carefully. She joined in conversations as appropriate, attended Faisal's majlises regularly, not holding her own majlises for women only, but actually participating in the male majlises as well. And incidentally, it was a common practice that when Faisal and Iffat were walking together, he would always let her work ahead of her. Never advance her, never go before her. This was the kind of respect that Faisal had towards Iffat. She was such an imposing figure that he always insisted that she had the right of way, so to speak. And everybody noticed this, of course, in that kind of a society. And it was not just a question of love to a spouse. It was also a sign of respect for this very educated individual. Later on, after her death, they found out that she actually had a teacher's certificate when she arrived from Istanbul, that she was destined to become a teacher. But she never told any of her children or anyone else about her interest in education or her qualifications to actually assume such a role. At any rate, I'm skipping over some things here because of time constraints. Now, tireless as well as determined, King Faisal's spouse encouraged education for girls in one of the most conservative societies in the Muslim world, and towards that end devised the establishment of specialized schools. In the book I talk about detail the girls' school that she established, and at the beginning it was a flop because no respecting family would allow their daughters to actually go to school, especially when the school was more or less private. You had to stay away from family. Which family would allow their daughters not to come home in the evening, even if she was going to school? But she insisted, and after trial and error, the schools that she created worked for both men and women as well, boys and girls, until such time all of the universities, There were no universities. All of the schools that existed at that time were essentially religious institutions. You went to the sheikh and the sheikh gave you the instruction that you wanted to hear, but she actually created a regular education system, brought in teachers from Egypt, from Jordan, from Lebanon, paid them money, hired people, went to raid the Ministry of Social Works after the country created its ministry, found these people and brought them in, paid them lots of money, kept them in the palace because they had no housing. Where would these teachers stay? Kept them in her own household just to encourage them so that they could participate in the education system that was created. And of course, when everyone objected to the fact that the education of women was unacceptable, and they would go and complain to Faisal, and Faisal would simply ask whether there was anything in the Holy Scriptures that prohibited women's education. And he would declare, quote, "We have no cause for argument. God enjoins learning on every Muslim man and every Muslim woman," end quote. And over time, the archetype presented by Iffat and Faisal found a steady audience among all Saudis. And in her own particular way, Queen Iffat really marked contemporary Saudi history by espousing ideas that were much larger than her own personal capabilities. She subjected her dreams to a will, which catapulted her own immediate family, and through the paradigm, she propelled her nation to new heights. It was the stuff of legends, really, that catapulted her from the shores of the Bosphorus to the gentle coasts of the Red Sea. Now, in the few minutes that I have left, what I'm going to do is talk about the one question that probably is on everyone's mind, namely the role of women in the kingdom, and how what entails in that discussion, especially when you talk about segregated society like Saudi Arabia. The position of women, and I'm going to talk about veiling as well because of her own particular views about the veil. The position of women in Muslim societies in general, and the Saudi environment in particular, is quite complex and frequently misunderstood. It's certainly true that Muslim and Western views on the role of women show sharp cultural differences, but the stereotype of Muslim women as uneducated, with no rights and no opportunities, is a caricature that is born out of malevolence. The Holy Quran gave women economic and social rights long before Western women attained such rights, and it would be fair to state that from the beginning of Islam, women were granted various liberties as well as distinct privileges. At a time when few women were legally entitled to inherit and bequeath property, hold their wealth in their own names even after marriage, and come under no obligation to contribute that wealth to their husbands or their families' fortunes in much of the world, Islam granted them such rights. In fact, the important roles played by the wives of the Prophet Muhammad in the course of his ministry contradicted the view that Islam undervalued the female half of humanity, which was and still is a popular myth. Now, it's also nevertheless true that under Islam, a woman was enjoined to behave modestly in public, and that, as in the West until very recently, was generally expected to give a full commitment to making a family home, an abode within which, incidentally, she enjoyed a preeminent role. Such expectations were rather different from those now widely required of women in the West, just as the stability of family life and security of women in Muslim societies differed markedly from the conditions which women faced elsewhere. That said, it would be also a mistake to think that the role of women in Saudi society was confined or is confined to homemaking. Although the recent development of the kingdom brought with it increasing opportunities for women in both education and employment. Now, significant reforms are introduced during the past few decades, recognizing the value of women as full members of society, with vital roles to play in the economy, and more important, as essential partners to men as the kingdom prepared for the many socio-economic challenges ahead. In the book, I discuss how Islam perceived women, especially since Iffat Al Thunayan was a practicing Muslim who took her religious duties quite seriously. She seldom wavered from her core beliefs, even as she pushed for dramatic changes in the ways her daughters and all Saudi girls and women behaved and were treated in the segregated country. Though extremist elements hijacked much of this discussion in recent years, Queen Iffat was a modernizer in the Islamic sense of the word, which is to say that she wanted to adopt the optimum means to benefit recipients and refused to see Islam as a faith that shackled women to subservience. The only kind of submission she backed was that to God, which applied equally to both men and women. And it was critical to ascertain her views on two important aspects of this question: veiling, the customary veiling of Saudi women, and the quest for gender equality. Now, I focus on these questions because I don't have time to go into the judicial aspects of it. But Iffat Al Thunayan was quite popular among the judiciary sheikhs in Saudi Arabia. She would bring them in. And every time, for example, she wanted to open one of her schools, she needed to have permission by the folks who had authority over these questions. So she would bring them in and to the palace and have discussions with them. And people were impressed that she could hold her own. She could have discussions. She herself used to be very modest. When she's in public, covered her hair, but she never wore a veil. She did not wear the veil as a practice. But when she went outside, she covered her hair temporarily. In fact, the photographs that I've seen of her are of a modern woman wearing Western clothes with makeup, with hairdo and everything. But she respected the environment in which she was living. And she accepted that traditions were not to be trampled upon, that they needed to be reformed gradually, and that women should be empowered to use their brain as much as anything else in order to maintain themselves in that society and play a larger role. That's why she focused on education and health. And incidentally, not just education and health, she also was responsible for the first benevolent societies that were created, where they would take all these women uneducated, illiterate, and teach them not only to read and write, but also basic hygiene, teach them about children's, how to raise children, how to bring them up, and provide with them as much as possible all of the requirements that they would need. Let me close here by talking about the veiling issue, because I think this is an important issue, something that I witness all the time with my own eyes. Although, again, we might want to discuss this in a few moments. We should not generalize in Saudi Arabia. What is valuable or what is valid in Riyadh is not necessarily valid in Jeddah. What is valid in Khamis Mushait is not valid in Hafr al-Batan. What is valid in Dammam is not valid in Qasim. This is a huge country, about the third the size of the United States. You have almost now 25 million Saudis, and traditions differ. There is an educated generation that has come up. In Jeddah, I see women jogging, Saudi women jogging, wearing jogging outfits, and their hair uncovered. So this is changing, but you will never see this in Qasim, for example. So again, this is a generalization, but customary veiling of Saudi women is still an important issue. And there is no question that is as sensitive as that of the veil, as Islam recommends both men and women to wear modest attires. I think it's worth repeating this. Islam requires not just women, but also men to wear modest attire. For complicated socioeconomic and perhaps political reasons, some Muslim women removed their hijabs, which caused sensations whenever it occurred. And in the book, I talk about what happened in Cairo, where the first women that came back from Europe essentially got off the railway station and removed their veil, causing a sensation. This is in the early 1920s, 1910s and 1920s. The famous case is 1923, when Huda Sha'rawi and Saiza Nabarawi, very brave Egyptian women who were returning from Rome, caused a sensation, and the rest is history. But what's important is that Iffat knew about all of these things, not only because she had witnessed them in Istanbul when she was growing up, but also because after she came to Saudi Arabia, the link with Egypt was so important. She would subscribe to all the women's magazines that were published, and all of them would be flown into Jeddah or come by boat a few weeks later. And she was aware of the movements that were taking place, not just in Egypt, but also in Lebanon, where a similar phenomenon occurred right about the same time, even in Damascus. So she was very much aware of what was going on around and wanted to emulate that legacy in her country as well. And again, these are all in the details are all in the book if you are interested to look at them in some detail. Now I'm going to close with one final point, because I know I'm going over my time limit. I'm sorry, I get so excited talking about the subject. It's, when you spend 3 years of your life learning about a person, I think that Queen Iffat really attempted to create a solid modernizing environment for Saudi women so they could articulate ideas to society, add value to their communities, and enjoy the fruits of life as best as possible. She also worked hard to share her own perspectives, which hovered around loyalty to crown and country at a time when Saudi nationalism was not clearly defined. Now, I want to stop here for a second and emphasize what that means really. As we all know, King Faisal was assassinated in 1975, which was devastating to her, obviously. When the news came in, she collapsed, literally. But she was a stoic individual. She bit her tongue and accepted the assassination, the fate that occurred, although she withdrew from society for several years, went to her Paris apartment. They kept an apartment in Paris. In fact, the last daughter was born in France. I'll talk about all of this in the book. And she stayed in France for several years. Everybody knew her because she used to take walks on the Avenue Foch, La Reine, the Queen. Everybody knew who she was. But she kept away for a few years and then they came back. When she came back to Saudi Arabia, obviously, because she had such an incredible aura about her, the king and the crown prince and all the senior members of the family visited her, not once to welcome her back, but repeatedly, because she was really respected. Over the years, she would sit at the same dinner table with Faisal, and all of these senior members of the family would gather, and they will exchange ideas. So therefore, all of her brother-in-laws really respected her. When later on in life, as she got old and sick, and King Fahd was similarly sick, you would see pictures of the two of them being wheeled in next to each other. So there was a lot of affection, and she used to be the kind of individual that looked after the family and objected when the king removed a member of the ruling family from office, for example. She would abscond them and say, your brother Faisal would have never done that. Be careful, we have to stick together. This family must be united at all times. She played really the key foundation, purpose, if you would like, of keeping this family together. This is something which Saudis are not habituated to thinking about or talking about or discussing, because simply said, the subject is not talked about. The fact that this book is even allowed to exist is a miracle in and of itself, but I attribute this to her legacy too, because she changed the minds of her offspring to actually accept that her story be told. Even though she passed away, she died on an operating table for a heart surgery in 2000. She didn't survive, but her last words were, "Pray for me." And I'll stop here and let you ask me questions.